Your marriage is stuck. You're right back there again in the same conflict, and you've been back there so many times that now you're here with me, hoping for a different outcome. Well, I have good news for you. You are not alone. If you give me a half an hour of your time, I'm going to share with you my step-by-step approach to teaching couples how to get unstuck for good so that they can rediscover the intimacy, connection, and fun that first drew them toward one another. The evidence from 40 years of research on marriage is surprisingly clear. A good marriage is our best bet for living a long and healthy life. I'm Kristina Harter, and I've been working with couples as a clinical psychologist for decades, and here's what I've learned. Almost without exception, couples who find themselves stuck in a rut are there because they become trapped, seemingly doomed to repeat the same core conflict over and over again. Even if the surface content of their argument changes, the deeper issues often don't. I often reference the 1993 movie Groundhog Day with couples. In it, Phil, a weatherman played by Bill Murray, awakens in a time loop to experience the same exact day, Groundhog Day, over and over again.
Do you ever have deja vu, Mrs. Lancaster?
I don't think so, but I could check with the kitchen.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
It's the same old story. In these stuck moments, a conversation can turn from one where you can handily navigate it to a place where hostility, anger, sadness, or disconnect take over in what seems like a blink of an eye. And even though it keeps happening, we somehow feel newly surprised, like we didn't even see it coming. Then the discouragement sets in. It's the same old story, yet again. But what stuck couples don't know is a thing I've been privileged to witness throughout my career. The same old story is actually good news because it boils down to one essential core conflict or problem or dynamic that needs to be identified and solved. And with everything that we've learned in recent decades, we are very well equipped to resolve that same old problem. The moment your conflict begins, one of you might feel like you aren't being heard, that the most obvious needs continue to go unmet, and you aren't appreciated enough for all the hard work that you're doing. Meanwhile, the other of you feels misunderstood, like all of this anger and disappointment toward you is completely unnecessary. You think, after all, if she heard what I was saying correctly, none of this would be going on. In fact, it never would be happening in the first place. So how can I not defend myself and try to explain my point of view? Now, this course is not for everyone. It is an educational course and it is not therapy. It is not recommended for people with untreated relational trauma, and it's not a substitute for treatment for any kind of psychological diagnosis. It's an educational course. It is also not for couples who no longer believe that their relationship is worth investing in. Couples where one or both partners are resolute that it's over should probably seek the guidance of an attorney or a mediator. But if you are in a long-term relationship and you still look at your partner and think, you are worth it, I'm worth it, I'm willing to work for us, then please stay for the remainder of this video. Here, you will learn that you can pull one another out of that all too familiar rut and start down a new path toward a different future together. Maybe you've been in therapy or read articles or self-help books or followed social media suggestions only to discover that the tips you learned are forgotten in the heat of the moment. Maybe you have tried to talk it over on your own, let it go, or simply waited for things to improve, and it hasn't worked. So I want to share a few stories of clients I've taught who were able to break through their same old story to make concrete and lasting changes. When I met Anna and Basil, their marriage had reached what they described as an all-time low. He had recently taken an even more demanding job with more travel and less downtime at home. They had tried counseling, but it felt like it stirred things up without really giving them a clear path forward. And it required that they both show up to every meeting, which simply wasn't possible with their busy schedules. Even though they felt so grateful for their lives, they were discouraged about their conflicts. It made no sense to them that they were so stuck with similar family histories, values, career in medicine and finance, and 4 healthy children. Why couldn't they figure this out on their own? Now, they had fallen in love during their sophomore year in college, and they had been stuck in a historical pattern of conflict that never had a chance to evolve to better represent who they were now. Incredibly competent people who were capable of handling the growing complexity of their lives quite well. Yet despite all their personal growth, small, meaningless disagreements would turn into blowouts emblazoned in their memories, followed by exhaustion and embarrassment. In our work together, Anna and Basil learned to stay ahead of the heated conflict. We demystified their conflict by digging in and understanding its origins. Now, their relationship is as evolved as the rest of their lives, and they're feeling more confident every day about their marriage. Sylvia and Tim were second-generation immigrants with very different family backgrounds, but they each had overcome real hardship, and both were determined to build better lives for themselves and for their children. Theirs was a marriage initially based on friendship, duty, and respect. They had very much enjoyed each other's company when they first met. But as they described it, as life got busier and busier and their family grew, they had to divide and conquer. And over time, their marriage had shifted into one of parallel lives and lacking intimacy and connection. I had met them right after they had both retired and had moved closer to their adult children because they were excited about expecting their first grandchild. But having poured so much of their energy into building a life for their children, they seemed to be happiest when they were with their children, but increasingly uncomfortable when it was just the two of them together at home. Because they valued kindness, they thought that avoiding conflict was the right thing to do. And as a result, there was growing distance between them and a lot that had been left unresolved over time. Now, rather than staying in that rut, Sylvia and Tim revisited their original courtship and learned to see one another as co-protagonists in the next chapter of their long life together. After decades of avoiding conflict, they learned to have difficult conversations and be more direct about their needs, trusting they could repair hurts if needed, and they did. Next, Jeff fell in love with Ty because he was a free-spirited artist who lived, as he described it, life to the max. Jeff, on the other hand, a financial analyst, was quiet, risk-averse, and represented a kind of stability that Ty never had growing up in a very chaotic and neglectful home. But after a decade of being together, the traits that first attracted them toward one another became the very things they most disliked about one another and were annoyed by. Ty grew resentful of being viewed as the irresponsible child, and Jeff was equally resentful that he felt like he was unable to break out of the role of always being the responsible one. Moreover, Jeff had been raised in a home with a lot of parental love and attention, and he wanted deeper connection with Ty. But Ty felt uncomfortable even saying, "I love you." And since Ty's short-lived affair from a few years past, the rift between them had grown. When I met them, they both admitted that they were largely together still for their adopted son and had withdrawn from one another, just kind of getting by and surviving day by day. In our work together, they were able to recall what they first really saw in one another and came to understand the wisdom in opposites attract. Opposites attract for good reasons. They learned the communication skills needed to stay on the same team. And once again, they became a force to be reckoned with. Each of them brought an important balance to their life as a whole, and they were still discovering and rediscovering things they enjoy about one another. For the most part, to this day, they have let go of old resentments and are having more fun together, and now see the next chapter in their lives as one they're looking forward to. Now, before I continue teaching you about how couples get unstuck, I want to take just a brief moment to share my own path to helping people like you. I have had the incredible privilege of working with diverse couples in so many different capacities throughout my career. In my time as an undergraduate and graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill, I did research in the direct line of John Gottman, a pioneer who has contributed more to the field of couples research than perhaps anyone else in the world. He studied recorded interactions among couples to understand the mechanisms by which they succeed or fail over time. As a graduate student, I began working directly with couples, performing my own observational research on shame and failure. I also studied human development and was trained as both a child and adult psychologist, which comes in handy when you're working with couples. I then moved to the Boston area to complete my internship and postdoctoral fellowship in psychodynamic psychotherapy, think Freud and Carl Jung, a branch of psychology whose focus is on understanding how the past shows up in the present. Later, still looking for more, I trained in internal family systems, a model that has exploded in popularity in recent years. In all, I have logged well over 20,000 clinical hours that have led to me developing this system that integrates aspects of each of these pieces of my work history into what I bring here to you today. It's an educational program with empirically validated tools, streamlined and adapted for committed couples like you who are stuck but ready to get out of that rut. My path to unsticking can be broken down into 5 essential steps. The first is to revisit your love story, to understand what brought you together, replacing today's spent dirt by bringing back to the surface that still nutrient-rich soil, as it were. Second, we explore some of the science behind conflict in relationships, so you can then apply that knowledge to your core conflict, helping you better understand how and why it happens. Third, we begin work on ourselves, developing what I call inside job skills that will revolutionize your understanding of yourself and introduce you to a new paradigm for understanding conflict with your partner. Fourth, we learn some of the best tactics for better communication, building on the insights from the previous step. And finally, with the tools and knowledge needed to make your own way as a couple, it'll be time for you to pursue that next chapter in your life and future together, using all the skills now available to you. So, now, by the time they start working with me, it's not uncommon that couples have forgotten why they fell in love or rarely think about it. So one vital first step is remembering what drew you to each other in the first place. When couples or individuals are successful, more and more is asked of them over time. I think of this as the burden of competence. And with all the demands in the day-to-day, it is difficult to remember how and why this whole relationship thing started. One common thing I hear, for example, is that couples simply used to spend time together and really enjoy it. And we know how hard that is to come by as life gets more and more complicated. When they fell in love, they just like to hang out together. Stuck couples often say things like, I want to be happier, or I want things to feel like they used to. So we ask what I call the magic wand question. It seems so obvious, but actually asking, what exactly do I want this change to look like, is incredibly informative and makes it possible to visualize the positive changes that you want to make in vivid detail. Now, how many times have we rushed to make a change in life and then fall back into the same old bad habits because we did not do the preparatory work that was needed? Like a flower trying to grow in spent soil with scarce watering, changes cannot take root if we don't get ready for them. This is one of the most exciting things about working with couples, though, teaching them how to develop and apply a new mindset to the process of change. This is something that in the rush to make things better is too often neglected. Couples are stuck because they lost their way or internal compass and are often are being guided by an outdated map. They can't see the forest for the trees to trailblaze a new path. So we work toward changing their stuck outlook by focusing on important and underappreciated tools. Now, while most of us would likely say our choices are guided by our values, it's easy to lose sight of them. So the mindset shift involves identifying our core values, particularly as they relate to our choices in our most important relationships. When we are lost, we need to know our true north. So we recall and communicate core values to ensure that decisions moving forward are in line with what matters most to ourselves and to each other. With a new working compass, I then teach you one of the most valuable skills I have encountered in the field of psychology, which is Marsha Linehan's notion of radical acceptance. There is a lot to say about this concept, but to put it simply, we often believe if we completely and totally accept things as they are, they will not change, when in fact, the exact opposite is true. Acceptance is different from agreement. Reality is what it is, yet in order to move forward together, we have to face the full and accurate landscape of how and where things are as a couple, even if we don't like it. Radical acceptance is a kind of redrawing of the relational map so we can find a new way forward. Next, to put couples in the best possible position to get unstuck, I teach them about developing a growth mindset. In cognitive psychology, the concept of growth mindset is based on the work of Stanford professor Carol Dweck. It is all about the attitude with which a person faces challenges or failure, how we process our failures, and how we choose to adapt and evolve as a result of them. With a growth mindset, couples begin seeing past the trees and through the woods, and alternate routes suddenly appear, enticing them away from that rutted loop they unknowingly have co-created together. Now, once we begin putting all of this together, we have a better sense of what real change looks like and why it matters. That helps you be in the best position to address the toughest part of being stuck, which is the conflict itself. Conflict is an inherent part of being in a relationship, but there are several factors that set the stage for conflict becoming entrenched or stuck. Here I focus on the top 3 I've seen in my work with couples. First, times of transition invariably make couples more vulnerable to conflict. These transitions are often stress-inducing events like losing a job or the illness or death of a parent, but they can also be transitions that, at least on the surface, seem positive, like having another child, a job promotion, a big move, preparing to be empty nesters, or having the chance to retire together early. Also, stuck couples are entangled in conflict that feels mysterious and outside of their influence, when the truth is conflict can be understood, and it begins with learning about the most common patterns of conflict. So, imagine one partner who comes from a large family where conflict is always out there in the open. Accustomed to approach style arguments, she has a lot of practice just fighting it out. Even when things would get out of hand in her household growing up, forgiveness and reconciliation were right around the corner. Her partner, on the other hand, was raised in a home where conflict was avoided at all costs. And he would tiptoe delicately into any place of disagreement. Unlike her, he imagined that a fight could easily rupture their whole relationship, that something really bad could happen. This sort of conflict approach mismatch is far more common than we might imagine. And it can happen when any of these 3 common pairings get mismatched. Why? Well, there are many theories explaining this phenomenon, but few are as well researched and proven as attachment theory. Attachment theory suggests that our relationships with caregivers in childhood shape how we relate to our intimate partners in adulthood. Have you ever wondered why your partner always seems to escape when you argue? Or perhaps why you always seem to be the one trying to get them to stay in the room and make things better? It might all boil down to your attachment styles. So, knowing more about your attachment style gives you an understanding not only of who you are and how you operate in relationships, but importantly, a clearer understanding of your partner. Learning about attachment can help couples to shift from rigid, repetitive conflict cycles that leave them depleted and lacking hope, to establishing secure relationships in which they are responsive to each other's needs and effectively navigate conflict with both care and attention. Let's imagine a scenario where a young couple still dating has an argument at a restaurant over what seems like a small thing. And now we go inside the head of one of them to explore a few attachment styles. With anxious attachment, you go into panic mode. You're scared that the argument means it's the end. They're going to leave you. You're sure of it. With avoidant attachment, you may become guarded, shut down, and have nothing more to say. You just want to be left alone. Now, with disorganized attachment, you may show signs of both anxious and avoidant behaviors, but at the core, it's tough for you to regulate emotions in conflict. You probably feel flooded by anxiety and may vacillate between staying close and getting as far away as possible. With secure attachment style, sure, you're hurt. You can see your partner is unhappy too, but you know you have a good relationship, and all relationships have their ups and downs. But your world doesn't feel fundamentally shaken by having a small disagreement. About 15 years into my career, I learned of an evidence-based model that I found incredibly effective at teaching people how to make changes from the inside out. If you've seen the 2015 Oscar-winning animated feature Inside Out, consider yourself introduced to internal family systems, or IFS. Once couples are stuck, it's not uncommon that they fixate on things they wish were different in their partner or in the marriage. I just wish he would give me a break for once, or if only he understood me better. This kind of thinking takes root once people have started to feel a sense of learned helplessness, like nothing they can do will change the situation, no matter how hard they try. In my 2 decades with couples, one of my favorite concepts to introduce is considering what is within your control and influence and what is not. Couples get stuck because we get caught up in trying to change our partners, but our greatest area of influence is actually changing ourselves. We must first do a U-turn and learn to better manage our own emotions to connect to ourselves. Before changes can be an outside job, it has to first be an inside job. So, essentially, IFS is a powerful tool for emotional regulation that locates all our emotions under the umbrella of parts. The assumption being that just as all things are made up of systems, so are our internal emotional worlds, right? So, in this way of thinking, we describe, for example, the part of us that is angry or the part of me that is impatient with my spouse. And in doing so, we recognize that it's not all of us, but just a part of who we are, making it much more manageable and less overwhelming, and frankly, less personal. We learn to label and unblend from these parts in a way that helps us work with our emotions, learning to speak for the part of us that is angry instead of from it. Key to this model is also the idea of self. Self is the part of us that is not a part. It is where we are clear, calm, connected, creative, or in scientific lingo, functioning from our prefrontal cortex. Here we learn to reparent younger parts of ourselves and essentially connect to an inherent healing capacity that's inside all of us. This process provides a sense of internal secure attachment. So we are not always looking to our partner in a childlike way, demanding that they make everything okay for us, because we are already okay. As you might imagine, this is a much better place from which to communicate with one another and to learn skills for communication. Once we are clear about what we can control inside of us, we are then ready to move to the fourth step and learn what most people focus on when they first talk about helping couples. I think of this as the outside job or communication skills. Many of the essential skills that I focus on come from the work of John Gottman, whose approach to the science of love revolutionized our understanding of how to best help couples get unstuck. Based on his work and the feedback I've received from hundreds of couples over the years, I've identified 10 essential skills that help well-meaning couples get unstuck. Depending upon what each couple needs, I encourage them to emphasize learning some skills over others. And I found that once people have prepped the soil for an environment for change, they've shifted that mindset, they understand their conflict better, they recognize that first, change has to be an inside job, which is actually quite empowering. They are then in the best position possible to learn these skills and change how they're communicating with one another on the outside. The remarkable thing about these skills is that we know that they work. Research shows that changing one small moment has a great deal of influence over what happens next in the conversation or where it ends. And these small choices over the course of a marriage determine the happiness of the marriage and influence whether couples stay together or not. Now, remember Anna and Basil? They worked on making 2 small changes: learning how to really listen using summary paraphrase and their use of I versus you statements. These 2 seemingly small adjustments helped them cool things down, and the quality of their connection improved remarkably. Sylvia and Tim, they began seeing big gains just by working on their 5 to 1s, making 5 positive statements for every negative one. And Jeff and Ty learned the difference between problem solving, which was their go-to mode, and emotional validation, a skill with which they lacked much experience. They also learned to take responsibility for the impact of their words and actions instead of just clinging to the subjective intent behind them. For each couple, the old rut of feeling unheard or blamed was systematically dismantled. Now, like any difficult endeavor, these skills require a lot of practice. But once couples know what skills to learn and they are in the best position possible to learn them, I find that they are eager to practice because they're so relieved to finally have a specific mechanism to actually change things moving forward. Now you have a choice. You can go it alone. You have succeeded in so many ways in your life on your own. What is the worst thing that could happen? Well, the thing with relationships is that they are not just about us. Successful relationships require humility and a willingness to be influenced by another. And the stakes here for failure are actually quite high. I'll ask you to do what I ask a lot of the couples in your situation to do that I work with. Imagine looking back on your life. What would it be like not to have invested in your marriage in the same way that you invest in everything else that's important in your life? For example, we invest in our education, providing for our children, our jobs, our homes, our cars, our travel and vacations. But somehow we think that our marriages should just work, that relationships don't require learning or care, that somehow a healthy relationship doesn't really need this kind of investment, when in fact, the exact opposite is true. Relationships are like gardens that need weeding, they need attention, they need watering, they need nutrients. Without the right care, they too can die. And that is a high price to pay. Now, the cost of separation or divorce can be overwhelming. There are, of course, very real financial costs, but then the personal toll, the toll it takes on loved ones and on children, on your friendships, on the life that you've built together, can amount to much more than financial hardship. Moreover, your own long-term health and well-being, statistically speaking, is at greater risk. Also, even if one of you ultimately decides to end your marriage, you would want to do so knowing you had done everything possible. And learning how to better communicate can go a long way in preventing an ugly divorce. Imagine what it would be like to show your partner that you're willing to invest in them and in yourself. And imagine that investment really paying off. Anything worthwhile requires work. My role is to help you transform. Remember, you are the protagonist of your own love story. Let's reclaim and rewrite the next chapter. I've set aside some time in the next 48 hours to speak with you about getting unstuck in your marriage. Use the information below to contact me now. Thank you.